Welcome to The Deep Dive. We're the podcast where we take your sources and really dig into them to pull out the key insights.
It's right.
And today, well, we've got quite a collection. It's a fascinating, sometimes pretty contentious look at modern views on politics, personal identity, even dissent itself.
Indeed. And our sources for this one include pieces from A Citizen's Call to Action, a critique of socialist views, something called Concerns about Leftist Power and Communism, and also Questioning Modern Sexuality, a skeptic's view. So our job here is to sort of navigate these different opinions, understand the arguments being made, and maybe see what they tell us about today's conversations, about belief and belonging.
Okay, let's dive right in then. First up is this viewpoint from A Citizen's Call to Action. It talks about someone who apparently believes, quote, democracy is not a good thing in any way. Pretty strong statement to start with.
Very strong.
Yeah. And this person supposedly sees the 2024 election, Trump's election, as just this incredibly negative event. The source's author even uses this highly charged phrase, calling it Twin Towers 2. Controversial way to put it, to say the least.
Wow. Yeah, that definitely grabs your attention. But what's interesting is how the source itself then pivots. It starts asking, well, if this person feels so strongly against democracy, why wouldn't they actually do something about it?
Right.
It brings up this whole question about, your duty maybe to act on your beliefs.
Exactly. And the source even spells out options. Things like leave the United States and live in another country. Or get into politics, maybe as a Democrat, and try to win future elections.
And then there's this clarification from the source itself, which I found interesting. It says it wouldn't want him to do those things. But, it argues, if he genuinely hates democracy and everything the United States stands for, especially with Trump as president, then he should take action. So for you, the listener, it really poses that question. If you fundamentally disagree with where your country is headed, what's your responsibility? What are you supposed to do?
Okay, so moving from that sort of broad political dissatisfaction, the next set of sources gets into a more specific clash of ideologies. We're talking socialism, communism. These critiques seem to focus on a figure identified as William, who comes up in a source called Unresolved Textual Tension.
Ah, yes, William.
So one source challenges him directly. It asks, basically, does he realize that if he lived in a communist or socialist country, he wouldn't be able to express any opinion about anything? This comes up apparently while discussing William's review of a book, Desperate Glory, by Emily Tash.
And that immediately flags this really fundamental concern about free expression, doesn't it? The source flat out asks, what's the point of living there if he can't exercise his rights to speak freely? It kind of frames his views as maybe overlooking the historical reality of those systems.
Yeah, and they don't really stop there. The sources try to dig into why he might hold these views. They suggest maybe he dismisses arguments just because it's trendy, or maybe he's afraid to think differently because he doesn't want to get canceled. They even bring up Lindsay Ellis and what happened to her in late 2021 as an example of that kind of online pressure.
Right, that cancellation aspect. The source then kind of expresses this hope that William figures this out someday. And it asks that question again, why live in a country you seem to hate, as puts it? It's that common refrain. If you don't like it, leave.
And building on that, we have another source, Concerns about Leftist Power and Communism. This one questions William's, let's say, broader intentions. It asks if he wants to impose their will on other people, like Stalin and his ilk did. And it directly links this to him identifying as a leftist and a communist. Is that what he meant? That's the question posed.
Yeah, and the worry is spelled out pretty clearly. Could he get elected and cause an entire country to become communist? They invoke the Soviet Union, Lenin, Stalin. It's using these really heavy historical examples to frame a critique of his current political identity. It shows a deep-seated fear about repeating history.
Which naturally leads to this next point the sources raise.
Exactly. How much does lived experience or perceived lived experience and historical understanding actually shape our politics? And how do we value or maybe dismiss those experiences in these debates? Because the sources really hammer this point with William. They ask point blank, has he ever experienced life in countries like Cuba, North Korea, Zimbabwe, or South Africa? The implications stated quite strongly by the source is that if he had, or even if he knew someone who had, he wouldn't believe in communism and leftism because, according to them, leftists often lead countries into such horror.
And to back that up, they actually recommend specific videos for him to watch. Commentators like Paul Joseph Watson, Mr. Reagan. And they specifically mention Aquarius Wave, noting that Wave apparently came from such a country to the U.S. at age 10, so the source claims he has real insight, unlike William.
Right, positioning lived experience as the ultimate authority there.
But then there's this sort of twist, or maybe a counter-argument about William himself. The sources express doubt about whether he'd even be open to these other views.
Yeah, they basically doubt he'll watch the videos. They speculate she might just be so narrow-minded that he'd think these people are deluded. And they reference something else he apparently said, maybe jokingly, maybe not, "Only what I say is true." The source felt that sounded serious, even if it was meant as a joke. Reinforces that idea of perceived closed-mindedness.
So we've got these really intense debates about politics, history, ideology. But the sources also touch on something else, the more personal side of things, especially online. This section is called Navigating Digital Interactions and Identity. For instance, one source mentions William blocking the speaker on YouTube on, quote, one of my YouTube channels, along with most of my others. And the speaker is left wondering if they, meaning William or maybe others involved, Maria or Katie, can even tell who is behind those accounts, if they know it's the girl managing those accounts.
It really shows how personal these online arguments can get, right? Even when the topic is broad political ideas. And things like blocking, well, they create these echo chambers, these silos where different views just can't interact directly. It shuts down the conversation, in a way. The source even says its video is mainly a message to William, but doubts he'll ever see it or reply. That sense of talking past each other.
Okay, and now for something related, but also distinct. It comes from questioning modern sexuality, a skeptic's view. This shifts the focus from politics to personal identity. Specifically, this source expresses, well, confusion or maybe disagreement about another online figure, Katie, identifying as pansexual.
Right. And just for clarity, pansexual usually means attraction regardless of gender.
Yes, but this source pushes back hard on that idea.
It makes this a very strong statement. Not everything that has a name is a real thing.
Yeah.
And it goes on to assert that the only sexualities that exist are heterosexuality, homosexuality, and lesbianism.
So you can see how this skepticism, these really firm opinions, they aren't just about politics. They extend right into how we define ourselves, how society defines categories of identity.
Absolutely. It's questioning the very validity of certain self-identifications.
So after digging through all of, what's the takeaway? What does this all mean for us trying to navigate this complex information landscape?
Well, connecting the dots, I think these sources really paint a picture of intense and a real depth of conviction people have. It's not just in politics, as we saw, but right down to defining who someone is. What strikes me is how often disagreement seems to get reframed. It's not just we see things differently. It becomes, for some, like a betrayal of core values, almost a moral failing to hold the wrong view. And that, that really fuels the polarization.
Yeah, definitely. We saw that frustration, didn't we? The calls for action against systems people hate, that whole debate about democracy versus other ways, and the serious worries about free speech, about history repeating itself under certain regimes.
Mm-hmm. And we saw how heavily personal experience, or at least appeals to historical knowledge, are used to either validate or, frankly, invalidate someone's political stance. Plus, those challenges and just communicate them online. The blocking, the personal grievances, getting tangled up with the ideas, creating those communication walls.
And finally, that skepticism stretching all the way to personal identity, challenging whether certain categories people use to define themselves are even real. It shows these deep disagreements are everywhere.
And it's really important for us to state, our role here isn't to agree or disagree with any of this. We're just reporting impartially on what's in these sources. We're trying to convey the ideas without endorsing them.
Exactly.
So for you, the listener, hopefully this deep dive gives you a snapshot of just how varied and how deeply held these perspectives can be. And it shows the struggle people have in reconciling their own beliefs with others who see things very differently, sometimes questioning really fundamental things like identity or free speech.
Okay, so here's something to maybe chew on after listening to all this.
Yeah.
Considering the sheer range of these deeply held beliefs we've explored and all the friction between them, how much do you think our own personal conviction shapes how we actually interpret fact and maybe how we engage or choose not to engage with people who just see the world in a fundamentally different way?